John Locke uh, is a very influential political thinker, very influential. And he is regarded as father of modern liberal democracy. Modern liberal democracy. And his major political work was the second treatise of government. Okay. It is difficult even to assess or feel the importance of John Locke because we are living with the institutions that are shaped by his ideas. We are living in what you can say is Lockean state. Like fish cannot understand the nature of water, or it can't understand what is life outside water. We can't really understand what is to live without following Locke's ideas. Okay. So let us identify the most important ideas of John Locke. The most important idea, I would say, is the separation between society and state. State and society are separated, and Locke proposed that only certain powers are given to the state, only some. Only some powers. Society keeps many things to itself, keeps many liberties to itself. State cannot take them away. Okay. State cannot take these rights from the society. Okay. It means the state is limited, and state is seen as negative. That is, you take only this much, and if you are taking little, we are happy with you. So this is a theory of negative state. So society gave to the state, okay. Here we are referring by state all its institutions. Okay. So society keeps many things with itself. beyond the purview of the state and gives only limited things to the state. And the state is expected to do certain things towards the society. Okay. And what is this called in Indian context? Fundamental rights. State is not supposed to trample upon these rights, not supposed to take away these rights. And these rights are protected in Indian Constitution under Article 32, where Supreme Court can intervene if these fundamental rights are violated. And Ambedkar calls it heart and soul of the Constitution. Why? Because Article 32 protects fundamental rights. And what are fundamental rights? Fundamental rights is what state cannot take from the society. State cannot take. No. This is society. And this is state. Okay. So, this is an essential feature of liberal democracy. Okay. What the state cannot do, however good its intentions are, is the essence of liberal democracy. Okay. And after this, you have how to control the state. Okay. State doesn't take much, that is one. Next, how do you control the state? State is controlled through separation of powers. There is executive. Executive doesn't have legislative power. Legislative power is held by legislature. So, separation of legislature and executive is a way of minimizing the power of the state. And then Locke thought executive, legislature should be separated, and plus legislature represents will of the people. Okay. And legislature is not permanent. This is periodically elected. So the features that we are familiar with, periodic elections, separation of powers. Okay. In a parliamentary democracy, executive being responsible to legislature. Okay. These are all part of Locke's idea of democracy. These are all Locke's ideas. Well elected. Okay. But of course, to consider certain cases, certain emergency situation, Locke thought that executive should have prerogative power, the power to act according to discretion for the public good without the prescription of the law and sometimes even against it. That's why we have emergency powers in Indian Constitution. Okay. So we are familiar with these features. But in this scheme, what modification Locke was making to Hobbes? Hobbes thought society should give all powers to a monarch, king, or assembly. All powers. So to Hobbes, all powers should be given to king or assembly because men are fighting against among themselves. Why are they fighting? Because they are power hungry. But Locke said, if people are power hungry, then if you concentrate powers in the king and assembly, king or assembly, because they are also men and so power hungry, so they would abuse. So Locke rejected Hobbes' scheme. Okay. This is summarized in one statement. Absolute monarchs are but men. If man is power hungry, then absolute monarchs also power hungry and they would abuse. And so, according to Locke, separation of powers is very important. But Locke was actually not writing so much keeping Hobbes in mind when he was writing the second treatise. He was keeping in mind one political thinker by name Filmer, Robert Filmer. He wrote this book titled Patriarcha, or The Natural Power of Kings, posthumously published in 1680. Okay. He defended absolute power of the kings, defended their divine right to rule. Okay. And he did it with basing his arguments on religious scriptures. Okay. And also he said that king is like a father to his population. So he said king's power is paternal. Okay. And his post is his property, which means he can pass on his power to his heir. So this is a traditional view of kingship. Okay. But we know Hobbes rejected divine right theory. And Hobbes rejected scriptural arguments. But Hobbes gave absolute power to the king or the assembly, whereas Locke disagreed. Locke's arguments against Filmer's book is that it is considered that Locke's book is primarily targeting Filmer rather than Hobbes. That is why his first treatise has so many biblical things, because it was dealing with divine basis for king's rule. And Locke said the idea that the king is like a father does nothing but flatter the natural vanity and ambition of men, too apt of itself to grow and increase with possession of power. Locke rejected the idea that the king is like father because he said paternal power is legitimate because the subject is not capable of reasoning. So citizens are not king's children in the sense that as children they don't know. Citizens are adults, reasoning adults. So king should go by the consent of the citizens. So relationship between a king and his people is not like father and his child. Okay. Father has to take care of the child because child is not in a position to decide. But citizens are not like that. They can reason. Okay. Locke was also targeting Filmer because, more specifically Filmer, because Hobbes was anyway not even defended by the royalists because of his atheistic arguments. So this was the context of Locke's theorizing. Okay. And next. And when Locke said society cannot give these rights to the state, okay, what kind of rights that the society needs to defend? And apart from rights like freedom of speech, freedom of association, Locke gave two very important rights: religious freedom, which is the basis of secularism in India. We are familiar with this. Locke was Protestant, and the Civil War was a conflict, partly a conflict between Catholics and Protestants. And Locke felt that the state should not interfere in the religion of the people. People should have religious freedom. At the time, there was discussing what kind of religion people should have, which religion was good, better. Locke took the stand that the people should be left free to be Catholics or Protestants, and the state should not take sides. This is one very important thing. And then another thing is right to property. Locke was very clear about people's right to property. Okay. And Locke proposed all these things as a part of contract. So he's a contract theorist. Society has agreed to give these things to the state on the assumption that state will do only this and will do this, will not do more than that. Okay. So right to private property is one of the very important rights. How did Locke defend right to property? His defense was like this. He defended is that man has a right to his body and so to his labor and so outcome of the labor, its outcomes. And the outcome of the labor is the property. So, to Locke, right to property is an extension of right to life, like this. Fundamental and foundational. Okay. What is the link between labor and property? Locke proposes that something is in nature. It's like this. The labor of his body and the work of his hands are properly his. Whatever then removes out of the state that nature has provided and left it in, he has mixed his labor with and joined to it something that is his own and thereby makes it his property. No man but he can have a right to it. At least what it means is that there is something in nature. Something in nature. Okay. And to this something in nature, labor is added, changed. So this becomes property. of the person who added labor. Okay. Land is in the nature, but one took it and developed it, made it his own. That is the property. So something in the nature plus man's labor becomes property of the person who added labor. But there is one very important condition Locke puts. Where there is enough and as good left in common for others. So there is a scarce water resource. If a person goes and then adds some purifier to it and then say, this entire resource is mine, then Locke might say no. Because there is not enough and as good left in common for others. So Locke is giving a limitation on conversion of the public to the private. But importantly, Locke is not placing limits on amount of private property. No limits on amount of private property. No concern on inequalities. Okay. So there is a condition on conversion of the public to the private, but there is no limit on, there is no concern on the accumulation or inequalities. All this is supportive of capitalism. So Locke's ideas are favorable to liberal democracy and also capitalism. And Locke glorified such an acquisition of private property. For example, he said, see, look at what Locke said on who are the people who acquire this property? He says, God gave the world to men in common. So it is in common to begin with. But it cannot be supposed that he meant it should always remain common and uncultivated. He gave it to the use of the industrious and rational, not to the fancy or covetousness of the quarrelsome and contentious. So Locke is glorifying the people who create private property. They are the industrious and rational. Later, Max Weber would call this Protestant ethic among the Puritan class. Okay, that justified capitalism. Okay, so this is a part of glorification of making money. Okay, all these are the ideas that came to define modern nation state. Okay, so it is on the basis of Locke's ideas. English parliamentary system is working and American system is working, and then many other democracies are working. Okay. So whatever be the limitations of modern democracies are also limitations of Locke's ideas. For example, no limitation on inequalities is one issue. Okay, no concern about rising inequalities is an issue. So these are Locke's ideas. And coming to what Locke thought of state of nature, Locke was also responding to Hobbes. Locke's idea of state of nature is this: state of nature has a law of nature to govern it. Hobbes didn't think there was a law of nature, but Locke thinks there's a law of nature. Being all equal and independent, no one ought to harm another in his life, health, liberty, and possessions. So Locke's state of nature is not Hobbes' war of one against another, because there is a law of nature to it. And Locke makes distinction between social contract and political contract. Out of social contract, society is formed, and out of political contract, authority or state is created. Social contract requires unanimity, whereas the political contracts requires majority. And government is only a trustee of the society, which means that sovereignty lies within the society. So he's an advocate of popular sovereignty. So these are all Locke's ideas which had profound impact on political institutions all over the world.